Everyone knows that Trump is basically Hitler. This is common knowledge now. We all know it. We've seen him goose-stepping around. We've seen his armband. We've seen his rejection of economic liberalism. Oh, wait, no, we haven't. That's not true.
Well, they used to have the red armbands. What's Trump known for these days? Red tie. Suspicious.
Or the dog whistle. It could be. It's entirely possible. But speaking of America, we have a limited line of merch. If you'd like to buy it, I personally like the Trump grilling t-shirt, which was actually made before Trump's McDonald's visit. So this was prophetic. We manifest it. And there's also mugs as well, and also just t-shirts. If you would like to buy these, that would be very nice. It would help support us because we are demonetized on YouTube, and that would help us keep the lights on and help me get out of my hovel in Swindon. So please do. But anyway, enough of that.
Also, you'll look really great.
That's true. We know it will look good on you. So this article from The Atlantic came out, and I'm going to read a little bit about it because loads of other media outlets picked up on this, the story that broke via The Atlantic, I believe, and it is Trump, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. And now immediately when I read this headline, I thought there's some funny business going on here because I don't think that he's going to be, invading Poland.
I feel that this is either taken completely out of context or paraphrased dishonestly.
I think it's more the former, because he did supposedly say that according to some sources, but we'll be able to have a look at that. So this article, I'm going to summarise most of it, but read a little bit because there's some devil in the details here that we need to pick apart. So in April of 2020, Vanessa Guillen, a 20-year-old army private, was bludgeoned to death by a fellow soldier at Fort Hood in Texas. And then Trump met the family and offered to pay for the funeral costs personally, except the funeral costs amounted to $60,000 US, which
How?
This is, yes, exactly. That's quite expensive for a funeral, isn't it? So Trump, after finding out about this, I'm reading directly from the article now, and this is other people's words. Trump became angry, and this is a direct quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican." He turned to his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and issued an order, "Don't pay it." Later that day, he was still agitated. "Can you believe it?" he said. According to a witness, "Effing people trying to rip me off."
It sounds like they were, to be honest.
After the roaring success of our UK election coverage, we are indeed doing another massive Lotus Eaters livestream to cover the US elections on Tuesday, the 5th of November. We will have a giant roster of guests, both in the studio and remotely via Zoom, and we will be live streaming on Rumble, so we'll be able to say exactly what we think, no holds barred. Do tune in, it's going to be great, and hopefully we'll be ringing in Trump's second term, or perhaps we'll be having a massive meltdown. Who knows what the future holds. See you then.
And also, he may be quite rich, but it's still annoying to someone if someone is, you do a good deed and then it comes back to you as you owe them a lot of money. It's not a small amount of money. You can't afford to continually give away $60,000 all the time.
There's a difference between charity, giving charity, and being scammed.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be scammed.
And he blamed disloyal generals for making him shoulder this bill. He didn't blame the family necessarily, because I don't think the family necessarily organised the funeral because they were grieving, and so the military offered to do it. As far as I understand it, at least. I could be wrong there. And so that takes us to some of the parts I've actually lifted from the article. And this is a really, really long article. They were obviously writing a really big piece that allows other journalistic outlets to pull from it and sort of make of it what they will, because a lot of these sort of pieces that are broke themselves, they write them out really long, and then it sort of gives other outlets a menu to pick and choose what they want to report on themselves, so they can also have a bit of variance and pick up different things, and that's what we'll see. So I'm going to read a little bit about from this. Normally I don't like reading a lot from articles because it gets a bit boring, but it is important in this instance because it is setting quite an important agenda in the run-up to the election. It's quite close now, and It says, the personal qualities displayed by Trump in his reaction to the cost of the funeral, contempt, rage, parsimony, racism, hardly surprising his inner circle. Trump has frequently voiced his disdain for those who serve in the military and for their devotion to duty, honour and sacrifice. That is the most partisan statement I've ever read.
So dishonest.
Former generals who have worked for Trump say that the sole military virtue he prizes is obedience. As his presidency drew to a close in the many years since, he has become more and more interested in the advantages of dictatorship and the absolute control over the military that he believes it would deliver.
But he's the commander-in-chief.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of the military hierarchy is loyalty and obedience to those above you.
Yes, one of the few roles of a US president is to be the commander-in-chief. And it's also worth mentioning as well...
So if they're saying, oh, he wanted obedience from me and I couldn't do it, I didn't want to do it, well, okay, great, you've admitted to being a traitor.
Mm-hmm. It's also worth mentioning as well that the US system, obviously set up with tyranny in mind, is actually quite well set up against this. So it's a very tough sell to say that even if Trump wanted to be a dictator, which I don't think he does, he wouldn't really be able to do that much. Like, if Trump actually did become a dictator, as they're saying here, it'd basically give him comparable powers to a UK Prime Minister under normal circumstances if they have a parliamentary majority. So it's kind of a bit ridiculous when you view it through that lens, because the system has already got this massive separation of powers. And so the idea of Trump getting more power and then this somehow being an utter catastrophe, well, we already have that system in the UK. You know, you have the legislature and the executive as a fused body, because we draw the government out of our legislature, unlike the US. So if that were to be the case, that would just mean that they would have a system that's more like Britain, which is not as catastrophic as it might sound.
Some would criticise the way that the American system is set up because without intending to, it allowed for the room for the swamp to grow.
That's true, yeah. Well, one of the criticisms of the massive separation of powers is by separating power out as much as possible, it diffuses it and allows there to be more pressure points on a state than there might otherwise be.
For infiltration and corruption.
Yeah, and just big money in politics and NGOs and corporations pressuring people. If it's more spread out, they can do so more all-encompassingly.
Yeah, that's why the FBI and the military can both come out around when Donald Trump was president and say, we're not doing what Donald Trump wants us to do, even though Donald Trump was elected on a mandate to essentially fix America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's silly. And then it carries on to say, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, Trump said in a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who heard him say this. People who were totally loyal to him that follow orders. That's a quote. In their book, The Divider, Trump in the White House, yeah, by the way, the title of the book obviously not favourable to Trump, The Divider. Peter Baker and Susan Glasser reported that Trump asked John Kelly, his chief of staff at the time, why can't you be like the German generals? Trump at various points had grown frustrated with the military officials he deemed disloyal and disobedient. So there it is. He's the commander-in-chief and he is frustrated that generals are undermining him. Remember Mark Milley? Basically counter-signalling him constantly. Example. Yeah. That's one of the people you need to look at during his tenure in office.
Mark Milley said, I want to understand white rage.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the guy that you want with an outsized amount of power in the American system, isn't he?
Yeah, and then it continues on. Throughout the course of his presidency, Trump referred to flag officers as my generals. And according to Baker and Glasser, Kelly explained to Trump that German generals tried to kill Hitler 3 times and almost pulled it off, which is true, to be fair. This correction did not move Trump to reconsider his view. No. They were totally loyal to him, the president responded.
Some of them were?
Yeah.
But evidently the ones that tried to kill him weren't. But
he's trying to use an anecdote to just explain the level of loyalty he wants from his generals. He's not saying, we need to annex Czechoslovakia.
Also, honestly, I'm quite dubious of everything that's being reported here as well.
I'm sort of taking it at face value, but obviously a certain amount of skepticism. People publish a book, just before the election cycle that's saying this sort of thing. Why didn't they say it at the time? It seems to me that it's been perfectly timed to impact the election, and this just reinforces the Democrat rhetoric that he's a danger to democracy.
What this is trying to say, because everybody for a long time has been saying, well, if Trump was going to be an evil Hitler dictator over America, why didn't he do it in the first term?
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, well, he wanted to be, he tried to be, but we had democratic protections stopping him from being. But will it work the second time around? That's the question that they want gullible idiots thinking.
Yeah, but it's also worth mentioning as well that Joe Biden, if we're looking at it objectively by, non-partisan metrics, the number of executive orders could be one of those metrics that you look at to assess how dictatorial a president is, because they just sign something into law without it going through Congress necessarily. It's the exercise of their power. Well, Joe Biden used that far more than Donald Trump did. So by that metric,
mostly to repeal positive things that Donald Trump did.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. He in the first 2 weeks in office, he used 30 executive orders, and in prior times the norm was about 5. So that's a massive increase.
And if I remember, a lot of it was to stop beneficial pipelines, and a lot
Keystone
of it,
pipeline.
Yeah, the Keystone pipeline, and then a lot of it was also to pull back on border control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were loads of things that were obviously beneficial policies that Trump had instituted that he discontinued, and that's part of the reason that Bidenomics was such a disaster, is that he stopped the magic formula that seemed to be working. Obviously it could be improved. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it was
People
at least
better
doing
off then than they are now.
Exactly, and so it's undeniable that there's a load of nonsense at the base of this. But the Atlantic have really been going for this angle quite a lot. So Trump is speaking like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini, which is quite a feat considering they're, a National Socialist, a communist, and a fascist. I mean, how can he speak like 3 different ideologies there?
Well, I would say because, Hitler and Mussolini have some similarities because of the fact, they went out in public and gave very rousing speeches to crowds of to crowds of thousands of people. Stalin, not known for that.
No.
Stalin was a sneaky behind-the-scenes operator who only even revealed himself as the head of the Soviet Union towards the end of the 1930s.
Well, there was a big struggle for power, wasn't there?
Well,
And
yeah. After he'd purged all of his enemies, then he was like, okay, I'm in charge to the international community. Because before then, I think they had some random figurehead who was technically the head of the Soviet councils.
When Lenin was sort of in health towards 1924, it was looking like Bukharin was going to be the anointed favourite, and that didn't happen. So I don't know why I'm getting onto Soviet history. Sorry, this is one of my pet topics.
It's a fun topic, though.
It is.
No, but I think maybe just because, they're all authoritarian. That's the only thing that draws them all together.
But it's sort of throwing mud at a wall and seeing what sticks, isn't it? Because you can't reflect all of these 3 figures in reality because they're ideologically opposed. Some more so than others, but still. And the Rolling Stone, this is this effect that I was talking about earlier, whereby different outlets pick up different parts of it. Rolling Stone went with the Trump was enraged by funeral costs for effing Mexican, rather than talking about the I want the Hitler generals thing. And I think that this is one of those things whereby the media sort of has a multitude of different strategies, and they sort of push and see what works. And the Rolling Stone has emphasized a different aspect of the same story, really. And of course, because most people just read headlines, which is ironic because that's kind of what I'm doing here, but of course I'm analysing it as well, they won't necessarily question it, and so they're sort of going for maximal damage with maximal approaches with one story rather than just covering it all the same, which is interesting. So even the Telegraph, which is purportedly a right-wing newspaper in Britain, Trump is a fascist who praised Hitler, former chief of staff claims. Just published without that much. Obviously they've got fascist, in inverted commas there, but still, he wasn't necessarily praising Hitler. He was just saying, I want loyal generals. It's a very different thing than
it's
that.
Media spin. It's nonsense.
It is indeed.
Dishonest.
And then there's Forbes here. Trump fits the definition of a fascist and said Hitler did some good things. The funny thing is, they're saying this like it's unreasonable, but, you know, if you have a rational look at history, he did introduce an anti-smoking campaign. He had the Autobahns, and he passed laws preventing animal cruelty. I don't agree with the man. I'm a libertarian, right? So I couldn't be as ideologically opposed. You know, I'm very anti-government.
And to be clear, there is no logical through line that can be drawn from anti-smoking bans, animal cruelty laws, and building large autobahns to murder Jews.
No.
These two things are separate from one another, and so saying that these were good ideas and this was a bad idea doesn't mean that you're saying it was all fantastic, it was perfect, it was amazing.
Yes, children do have an understanding of this idea.
Grown-ups less so.
Yeah, weird that, isn't it? But, yes. We've even got this from The Globalist, which is funny that this organisation exists.
I've never heard of The Globalist.
Trump and Hitler. How accurate a comparison?
Not very.
No.
Not very at all.
He doesn't even have a mustache.
He doesn't. I've never seen him with a mustache. I've seen him with a bit of stubble and a beard. Doesn't look like Hitler.
I've not seen him do the Centurion salute. I've not seen that.
Never once. He wears a suit.
I've never seen him in Nuremberg.
Maybe he's probably been to Nuremberg.
He's not been talking about Anschluss or Lebensraum.
No. Although maybe Mexico needs a bit of... No, I'm joking.
He's not even set up brown shirts. I mean, come on. Where are these comparisons here?
What did you read through? What are the comparisons that they say? Is it just rhetoric?
Yeah, of course it is. It's all rhetorical, isn't it? And it's a stretch. And here's the Washington Post. Trump gets compared with history's great villain because his rhetoric is that bad. But he's leading in the polls. If his rhetoric is that bad, then you're condemning the majority of people who have voting intentions in the US.
Exactly.
That's sort of what they're trying to do anyway, isn't it?
That's
being a
the
bit
whole point.
facetious here.
I pointed out recently, Carl put a tweet up on Twitter saying that look at how bad the approval ratings are for our leaders, and you know Emmanuel Macron had an 18% approval rating, and I responded to it, and I think this is absolutely true. Western leaders see bad approval ratings as a sign they're doing something right. Because, like you've suggested there, they see the plebeian masses as little fascists in waiting. And so if they're pissing these little fascists off, they're pulling us onto the right side of history, whether by force or not, and doing it properly.
I mean, I'm quite the elitist, but even I think that's a bit strong.
Yeah, I think it's evil.
Yes, it probably is. So, finally, there was this one flew by the wayside a little bit. Donald Trump compared to Hitler after vowing to invoke 1700s law used to justify Japanese internment camps. So basically, Trump wants to use this law from 1798 to mass deport illegal immigrants.
Wasn't it the administration of a Democrat who's considered in mainstream history to be one of America's great heroes that set up those Japanese internment camps?
It may well be. But that's
Surely
not a story that
thing.
Democrats will tell you. Sorry, got to drop a little Palpatine reference in there. But maybe there's something to this, because you see, Trump is about to go on a short Italian man who's bold on his podcast, and were there podcasts in the 1930s, I'm pretty sure Mussolini would have one, wouldn't he?
I'd have been really interested in listening to that. That'd be really entertaining.
Have you seen the footage where there's a footage of him meeting Hitler, and he looks like a really weird guy. Like, he turns to the camera and goes...
Oh, I've seen that, yeah.
It's scary. It's like a jump scare.
That's great. Also, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, manlets. The lot of them.
All people can be trusted, can't
the
they?
1920s and 30s were the age of the manlet. And that's why everything went wrong.
The age of the giant is nigh, isn't it, Harry?
Yes, it
We're
certainly
going to take
is.
things back.
Fee, fi, fo, fum.
So, yeah, Trump... I'm going to move on from that. Trump cancels all his events in favour of one of the worst people ever, this headline says, and that is Joe Rogan. bit strong, calling him the...
These people have the emotional rhetoric of a moody teenage girl.
the worst person ever. So all those...
What's her name? Scroll down. Where's her name?
Samson says...
Oh, Ellie Quinlan Horteling. Sorry, go back up. Look, her name's at the top of it.
Oh, yeah.
Ellie Quinlan Horteling.
Okay.
That's a ridiculous name.
Yes. So, you know, Joe Rogan, worse than serial killers, murderers, nonces. I don't think so, personally. But anyway, Harris was also looking at going on Joe Rogan's podcast, which I think would be an utter disaster for her.
She needs to do it.
It would be hilarious.
That would be amazing.
It'd be a goldmine.
Her having to remain consistent over a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan as he lights up a spliff and starts asking her about chimpanzees.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine how much she would giggle if she gets a hit on Joe's joint?
Horrible.
It would be such a shrill noise that black holes would open up. But anyway, it's also worth mentioning that just like Adolf, he's got an alliance with the East. Apparently, Arabs are voting for Trump en masse for some reason. And apparently US fighters are saying that, UFC fighters, not US fighters. And it's also worth mentioning the Democrats, you know, are expelling Muslim leaders from Kamala Harris's rallies. And they're not capturing the Arab vote, you know. So although it's not the Japanese this time, he is aligning with another Eastern power that is looking to establish an empire. You know, basically the same thing, isn't it, Harry?
All makes sense. All makes sense to me.
And it's worth mentioning as well that Trump has now surpassed Harris in a Wall Street Journal poll, which is quite significant. Obviously, Wall Street Journal known for being very much regime stooges. And yeah, Biden says 14 days before the actual election, we got to lock him up. And of course, there's not actually anything they can legally do to lock him up before the election. So this is empty rhetoric, but it goes to show that they're pretty desperate.
Also, this is stealing Trump's rhetoric from 2016.
It is.
So all
plagiarism again.
All of the best Democrat rhetoric is reheated rhetoric from the right 10 years ago.
It genuinely is every time, isn't it? So yes, obviously Trump is not Hitler. Obviously they presented a quote that was meant to be hyperbolic to emphasize how loyal he wants his generals because they were giving him a headache, and the fact that they've waited until just before this election to talk about it sort of shows that they were waiting to smear him right before the election to try and influence the result. It's not rocket science. You've seen it all before. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can watch our series Lads Hour, where we tend to have the most fun. This one was on about Batman and Robin, the 1997 film, and it was hilarious. And if you want to see all the other things we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.